Welcome to another episode of the Lone Recruiter Podcast. I'm your host, Brett Clemenson, and today we have Sion Cousins. Sion, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
So I remember, on the events, you did Olympic lifting. I remember you going through that phase. You were lifting some astronomical weights. And tell me, what were you doing there? What were the events?
Yeah, so I competed in Olympic weightlifting, which is clean and jerk and snatch. So 2 lifts on a platform by itself.
Yep.
And the reason I did that was I wanted to do an individual sport
Yep.
where you get all of the ups and all of the downs on you. So
Right.
in a team sport, you can have the worst game of your life and still win.
Yes.
In an individual sport, it's all on
Spotlight's
you.
on you, yeah.
And I wanted to feel that. So I competed in Olympic weightlifting, which I had done in the past, sort of revisited it, and I ended up competing in under 81 kilo category, made it through to nationals, ended up coming 9th in nationals.
And Olympic lifting is where you get the big bar, for anyone who's not athletic, the big bar, and that's where you bring up to your chest,
Yep.
then you do the next push up above your head.
Yeah, the jerk overhead.
And how heavy did you go?
So the heaviest clean and jerk I've ever done is 155 kilos, and that was at the time I was competing under 77 kilos.
Right.
And the heaviest snatch that I've ever done is 120 kilos.
That is astronomical.
Thank you. In the grand scheme of things, like I said, very niche sport. There's guys that lift significantly more than that. The top guys in the world and obviously Australia. But yeah, it's
Why I love it, right, is that like you were jacked when you were about to compete. Your legs and your arms and your shoulders, they were jacked, and it was a lot of lean muscle, right? You worked hard for it. I watched him at the gym. I was there watching him train. It was just like one lift, wait 5 minutes. One lift, talk some more shit. One lift. And then you went, okay, I'm going to do another sporting feat. And you decided that I'm going to not use my muscles anymore. I'm going to use my endurance abilities. And you booked yourself, you put your hat in the ring for, what's it called? The Sahara.
Yeah, so I ended up transitioning into trail running.
Mm-hmm.
So the first event that I did was a 100-kilometer run through the Blue Mountains.
Oh, I know that
and
one.
that was sort of a B race, we consider him, something to build up to. And then I did a 100-mile, so 166-kilometer race through the Snowy River, and you summit Mount Kosciuszko, so the highest point in Australia. And that was sort of a B race to what I've just finished, which is called Marathon des Sables, which translates to Marathon of the Sands. And it was a 252-kilometer run through the Sahara Desert in Morocco.
My goodness.
So,
and what was the hottest what was the hottest temperature it reached whilst you were on foot running?
So being self-sufficient and out there, we didn't really have access to anything to really tell. There was a Norwegian soldier who did it, and he had this big pack on, and he had a thermometer on his pack.
Right.
And that was the only gauge that we had. And on the hottest day, which turned out to be our long stage, it read 60 degrees. So it was in direct sunlight. So
Right.
I don't think it was 60 degrees, but that day there wasn't a breath of wind. It was dead still. So I've lived in the Middle East, and I felt 50-degree weather multiple times in my life. And this was by far the hottest I've ever been in by a long shot.
And you were running. And that day you ran how many kilometres?
85 kilometres.
In sand and rock.
Yep.
And it's now showing 60 degrees, but let's call it 50.
Yeah.
Just to be fair to Mother Nature. That's incredible. I don't even think I can do a sauna at 50 degrees without struggling after 10 minutes. And self-sufficient. So you had limited water as well. You were only allowed X amount of water a day.
Yeah, so the race is a self-sufficient race. You have to carry all of your own food. You have to carry all of your own sleeping equipment. So whenever you sleep, you got to carry your mat and a sleeping bag. And you get rationed water, and that's to lean into the self-sufficiency. So obviously if you got unlimited water, you could get to the end of the day, grab a 5-litre bottle and pour it over your head and have a shower. So what they decided is to lean into the self-sufficiency. They would ration you water, so 5 litres a day that you get, and you got to use that 5 litres to rehydrate your meals because you use freeze-dried meals. You got to obviously drink that water, and then you got to try keep a little bit clean. So I ended up being in the desert for 9 days. We ran for 7 days, and the entire time you've got no running water, no electricity, nothing like that. So you got to be very, very smart with your water.
So I have a desk job, and they tell me to drink 4 litres a day. You were running in 50-degree weather, and you only got 1 extra litre.
Yeah, so we had 5 liter ration at the start of the day, and then along the stages of the race, you could fill up whatever you were carrying. So, for example, I was carrying 2 800 ml bottles on my chest.
Unlimited refill.
So I could get a 1.6 liter refill.
Right.
Yeah. So, and then they were scattered throughout. So they were just, and then they had some water there as well that they would pour on your head to try cool you down. But that was sort of bore water. So you can't drink that water. If you drink that water, you end up very, very sick. Yeah.
Wow. So, why did you want to do that race? Like, you're mad. That I know I'll never do it. I just know it's not in me. It's not a core value of mine to go and chase a race like that. But why did you want to do it?
I think, especially as we get older, we tend to shy away from adversity and suffering. And over my life, I've learned that there's lots of lessons to be learnt there to grow as a person, to become a better person, is to sort of to lean into that. I've joked about this before, but I've never been camping. The first time I ever slept in a sleeping bag was in the Sahara Desert.
What a time.
It's not something that I was comfortable with. And I think you learn a lot about yourself as a person, and you learn lots of incredible lessons when you put yourself in those positions. And don't get me wrong, there's suffering and adversity that you can pick, which is like doing this race.
Yes.
And there's suffering and adversity that, unfortunately, a lot of people don't get to choose. And that can be a diagnosis of an illness. That can be a sudden death. That could be a political. It could be one of many things. So, but I think doing hard things in your life is relative. So the more hard things I expose myself to, the better the future version of myself is going to deal with hard things. So if there is a sudden death, if there is a diagnosis or something like that, I have the evidence in the past that I'm capable of dealing with really hard things. I think if I shy away from any suffering and adversity and something props up in my life later on, maybe I won't know how to deal with it. Okay. And I think that came from COVID. I never could have foreseen that happening. A whole bunch of adversity got thrown at me and suffering. And I wasn't capable of dealing with what was on my plate. So now I intentionally put myself in these positions to see what I'm made of, to learn the lessons. Yeah. So then later on in life, when something happens, I've got the toolkit to deal with it.
Did you have to do any specific mental preparation for this race?
No. So there wasn't anything really that I think I could have done mentally to prepare for this. And what I mean by that was the lessons that I actually walked away from this were things that were completely unforeseen. Great. And I think that is the beauty of doing these events. I think if you knew the lessons you were going to learn on the events, that maybe it's not the right event. So, and I'll give you an example of that. This might be a long story, but I thought that leaving my life, I do a lot of public speaking. I have lots of stimulus, as in loud music, I'm around people a lot. I'm very energetic. When I got put out into the desert, the Sahara Desert, for the 7 to 9 days, I was alone for the vast majority of that. I had no electricity. I didn't take any music. I had no headphones.
Were you allowed to?
You could, yeah. Right. Yeah. Some people took headphones and they took little iPod minis with a plug-in headphone so they don't die. So a lot of people turn to music to, I suppose, help with that adversity. Whereas I chose not to do any of that. And I adapted to that quite easily. That wasn't a challenge for me. But what happened for me was when I returned back to normal life, it had recalibrated my brain to what stimulus I could deal with. So before I went away, I was running at a 9 out of 10 with stimulus in my life, from my email inbox to public speaking to the people, like being around 50, 60 people a day, just to noises. I was in the desert for 7 to 9 days where I was alone with my thoughts. I came back and had recalibrated what I was capable of dealing with, stimulus-wise.
As in you can't deal with as much?
I couldn't, no. Yeah. So when I first came back, I couldn't be around people. I couldn't bring myself to open my laptop. I almost walked. I was getting my hair cut. The 2 days after I got back, I had a haircut booked in and had a guy standing either side of me, barbers, and then 2 guys sitting in the chairs, and they were playing music. And I pretty much said, I can't do this. I was halfway through. Just the stimulus, the noise, just all of that. So that was a lesson that I learned. Unfortunately, it took 9 days in the desert to understand that my life was probably too highly stimulated. So now what I'm trying to do is find smaller ways that I can implement that into my life to reduce the stimulus, because I did find a great deal of happiness in being alone with my thoughts without all this external stimulus. Going to sleep with the moon, rising with the sun, being in the elements, there was a lot to it, and something I never could have foreseen happening.
You're a camper now, is that what you're telling me?
I hate camping. I definitely understand that. But what I have now is I understand camping now, which before I didn't. I just thought you go to a nice hotel, that would be a much better variation. Right. I understand camping now, but I don't like camping.
Okay, very good. Another lesson that because I was following you on your Facebook page, you were able to get a few videos out throughout the course, and it was such a fascinating follow. And one of the ones that really shone out to me was right at the beginning, before you'd even done the race, where you were fraternizing with all the other race runners preparing. How many were there? 100? 70?
At that time, so there was 11 Australians. So I think what you're referring to are a couple of the Aussie guys that I met.
Right, and they were the military guys?
Yeah.
So there were a couple of ex-military guys there, or current military guys.
Yeah.
And talk us about that part of the race, well, pre-race, because for me, I was like, that's amazing. I just love how you lent into their advice.
So these were sort of lessons they were inadvertently teaching me. So these two guys that we're referring to, they'd been in the military, still in the Air Force for 17 years, multiple deployments, have been in some very, very hard positions in their life. So instantly, I've got respect for them. Quite stern guys, both of them 6 foot plus. One's 100 kilos, one's 90 kilos. Pretty intimidating guys. So one of the things that we're talking about is they coined it just staying dirty, and they don't mean that in a hygiene way, but what they were talking about was the more that you try to fight some of these things that were going to happen, the more that your morale continues to go down. So I'll give you an example is the sand blows into your tent. If every single time that you're in the Sahara Desert, if you try to reduce how much sand is in your tent, you're adding processes in, which is obviously cleaning the sand away. You're adding fail points in because you're never going to beat the sand over there. And then your morale just continues to go down and down. And what they were saying is when you get there, they were kidding, but they were half serious, is get there and roll in the sand. Put the sand in your hair, put the sand in your sleeping bag, accept it. And the moment that you accept it, then you can then your morale starts to boost because it is just a part of the surroundings. And I was listening to talk about this inadvertently and sort of thinking to myself, how do I implement this myself? So what I did was we were able to take these little stoves. So they hold about 400 mil of water and you have these little hard fuel tabs. You light the hard fuel tab, you boil your water, and you use that boiled water to rehydrate your meals. So then when you're eating, it's nice and warm. It added no nutritional value. It had no other benefit than it would make your meal warm.
Or comfort.
So I thought to myself before it went out there, I said to myself, I'm ditching it. So I'm just going to eat lukewarm meals for 9 days because that's something where I can reduce processes, I can reduce fail points, and the benefit wasn't worth it. I still got the same nutritional value. I still got the same satisfaction of hunger, but I just had a lukewarm meal.
I love that.
Yeah, so that was my way of implementing staying dirty. And I saw it multiple times that week as people would light their fuel and the wind would blow because there's just wind and sand everywhere. They would blow out their lighter. They would get the shits at the lighter. They would finally light their fuel tab and they'll put their water on top. It takes 8 minutes to boil the water. 4 minutes in, the wind would blow and blow their water off. They'd put their fire out and they'd lose 400 mil of water, which out there is very valuable.
And then that's just a trigger point.
Yep. And then their morale would get down, then they would get frustrated, then they would get angry. For what? For a warm meal. Yeah. So for me, I used to just pour the water straight into my meal and just eat it and reduced all those processes. So that was my way of taking that lesson that they were inadvertently teaching me and using it as sort of staying dirty.
So is that what you do now at home? You get a bowl of cornflakes, just go up to the tap. No milk, gonna go off.
I must admit, since I've been back, I've really picked and choose where I implement that lesson. It's not something I'm going to implement into my daily life.
Fair enough. Look, another, following your journey there, I am always one to see the comedy and things. I think you are as well. But you were in some real dark places on that run. And I remember one video where you logged in with your GoPro and you said, oh, man, I've been, I think you said something along the lines, it's day 3, 20, 30 Ks into this run. It's hot. I'm in a dark place. Like, if you've ever been a runner, I haven't, but you just know people go into these like dark, depressive, like almost depressive spaces where it's just darkness, depression. you just feel like you're in a hole. I remember you logging on and just saying, I'm there. It's just so tough, guys. All I got to do is one step in front of the other. And then the next minute, you're like, it's 4 hours later. I thought I was in a deep hole. Now I'm in a deep hole. Yeah. Tell me what was happening there.
So this day in particular, I ran out of water.
Oh, wow.
So I was 55 kilometers in, and I had 4 kilometers till I could get water again. And I was down to 400 mil of water. So I had 100 mil of water per kilometer. Wow. At that time, I was walking. We call it a death march. Head down, eyes closed, and it's just one foot in front of the other. You just do what you can to keep moving forward. I looked down at my watch, and I was walking at a 13-minute kilometer, which, to give you an example, like I run at a 5-minute kilometer. Right. I'm walking at a 13-minute kilometer pace.
Is that slow?
It's very slow, okay. Yeah. But my heart rate was 143 beats per minute.
That's high.
It's very high. And it was just because of the heat, the stimulus, the radiant heat off the sand. You're so exposed in the Sahara Desert. There's nowhere to cool down. There's obviously no shade. There's no trees. So that's when I said, I'm in a deep, dark place. And I was thinking to myself, this is the bottom. This is as bad as it gets. And it turned out it wasn't. I thought 1 o'clock was the hottest part of the day, which was about this time. Turns out that it just continued to get hotter that day, and it just got hotter and hotter. And that's when I turned my camera back on. I took a really little camera and filmed some sort of thoughts. And I remember saying, I thought I was in a deep, dark hole. Turns out I was in paradise. And now I'm in a deep, dark hole. And that was later on. And honestly, sometimes you think you're at the bottom and it takes a little while for you to understand, you know, and it's quite humbling to realize that maybe you're not quite at the bottom yet, you know.
Wow.
You've got some more suffering ahead of you.
And that period just after, like, that was your low point in the race?
That was the worst. Yeah, that was by far the lowest that I went the entire time. It was actually really good morale. Body held up really well. Did, you know, for myself, did incredibly well. That particular instance was definitely the low point.
And you have a little button there, don't you? Like, if you've got like an ejector button, because they're in the middle of the desert, but if you're about to die and whatever, you need an eject. And what is 5,000? Cost $5,000. Yeah. They helicopter you out to France.
Yeah, €5,000 is what I heard.
€5,000.
Yeah,
so they didn't even tell you the cost.
Yeah, I don't know what it was. I didn't want to know. I think you know, I heard that. So you have a GPS on your shoulder and EPIRB. And if you hit that button, a helicopter flies in and picks you up. So that's if you've had a heart attack, if you've broken a leg, if, you know. Yeah. And typically they're there for other people. So if you see someone go down, you press theirs. Yeah. Very rarely you press your own. Yeah. And yeah, I was never by any means close to even wanting to press that. Okay. You know, that was interesting. This is at a point where it's incredibly difficult to keep going. But I was never in danger, I thought of, you know, that's case. So I never was close to pressing it, but I could see why someone would.
Yeah, fair enough. Look, I wanted to just talk to you about this run. I'm so fascinated by it. But to bring it back to the real world, and that is the real world, but, you know, the world of work and what you do as a counsellor, what I do in recruitment, what do you take from that race that is actually like an eye-opener moving forward in life, or a new perspective in life moving forward, or a new habit maybe, or realization that's come out of that race? Because I know you went into it not really knowing what you'd get out of it, but it sounds like you got a bit out of it.
And it's exactly why I do these, to get as many lessons out of it as I can. So I'll give you one, I suppose, big lesson that I took away was the two military guys. They taught me a lot over the time. So Zach and Shard are their names. And one of the ones was they were teaching me about life admin. Okay, so when you're in these scenarios,
Beth loves life admin.
Yeah, the better you are on your own admin, the less, I suppose, sticking points that you end up finding. So what I mean by that is, they were saying to me, the moment that you think of doing something while you're out there, you sit up and you do it immediately. And reason being is, when the sun goes down out there with no electricity, the longer you put things off out there, like packing your bag for the next day, for getting your sleeping stuff ready, for prepping your food to eat that night. The longer you put that stuff off, the sun goes down, everything becomes significantly harder because it's dark, the wind picks up, gets really hard. The moment that you think of doing something, get it done. And I suppose the lesson that I took away from that was the anxiety cost of the to-do list in your head. So in practical life, that one thing that you are putting off, that hard conversation you might have to have with a partner, the hard conversation that you might have to pick up the phone call and speak to a client, or that one thing that you don't want to do, that's your life admin, and that's the thing that you need to get done as soon as possible. Reason being is if you stress over that conversation, maybe in a relationship for 5 days, 10 months, 5 years, the anxiety cost of thinking about that conversation is significantly worse than having that conversation.
Yeah.
So I took that lesson as your life admin, that hard thing that you're avoiding. The sooner you do that, you reduce all the anxiety around it and you face it. So that was a big thing that I had over there in those settings. That was things like washing your feet, getting your food ready. In real life, that's things like picking up the phone, writing that email, having that conversation, cutting that friend, whatever that one thing is that you're avoiding. The sooner you do it, the better. You get rid of all that anxiety it costs.
Haven't they proven now with, like I think it was on Huberman, but they proved that if you complete a task that you don't want to do, your neurological pathways really strengthen and grow in massively positive ways in your mind.
And it makes perfect sense why.
Yeah.
You know, you want to expose yourself to that. Don't get me wrong. There's very, very hard things in life that you have to choose to do. And the consequence isn't always positive. But the idea of thinking about doing that for a long period of time is going to reduce your mental wellness significantly more than dealing with the consequence.
Yeah, it's taxing, isn't it?
It is.
You're carrying the load.
And for some of us, we're not carrying one conversation. You might be carrying 10, and I'm not saying go out tomorrow and have all 10.
Yeah.
But the sooner that you get those things done, the better, and it reduces the friction later on as well.
That's a huge learning.
That was one that I took away. Out there is a little bit less practical in life. It was more about getting your admin done, about looking after your hygiene. But you can take that lesson and you can apply that to your real world.
Absolutely. So what's next? What's the next challenge? So
for me, Marathon des Sables MDS was meant to be the end point of my ultra running. I actually, with some of the races that I did last year, had the ability to go into a lottery to do a race over in France, and it's called Ultra Trail Mont Blanc. And for trail runners, it's the Super Bowl. It is the biggest event that you possibly could do, and it's incredibly difficult to get into. And I had no ambitions to do it, but with some of the races that I did, I earned lottery tickets that I could put into a lottery to get chosen to do it.
Right.
Turns out I got chosen. So this is, I'm considering for me as my victory lap. So in end of August, I go to France, and the race runs from France into Switzerland, into Italy, and then back to France. And it's through the Alps. So it's 10,000 meters of climbing over 170 kilometers. And you do it in one go. So my goal will be to do it in under 40 hours.
Wow.
And that's in one hit. And what makes this race so unique is the climbing. So like to give you an idea, Everest is 8,800. This race has got 10,000 meters of elevation gain and loss, obviously over 170 kilometers. So it brings a whole different discipline into it. And that's essentially what I'm coining as my victory lap.
I love that. You're coining it a victory lap. That's cool. And then that's your running career over.
That'll be it for me for ultra running for sure.
Wow.
I've learned sort of some of my core values is to learn and to experience new things. So hence why I've jumped between sports, individual sports, team sports, ultra running, whatever it might be. So I feel like I've learned some incredible life lessons. I've grown a lot as a person from doing this, but I think it's time to move on and to find something new. Yeah.
I love it. Look, I'm gonna park the Sahara Desert, the sports stuff.